The morning light spills through stained glass and fractured colors, draping the coffin in pale warmth that feels almost cruel. She stands before it, hands trembling just enough to look sincere, the perfect portrait of grief. Every sigh, every glance downward, every quiver of her voice lands exactly where it should. Around her, the air is heavy with perfume and whispered condolences, the kind of mourning that feels rehearsed. When she presses a tissue to her cheek, the gesture lingers, soft and deliberate. The congregation sees heartbreak. She feels calculation. Their pity wraps her like a veil as she counts silently. Hours, not tears. The organ swells behind her, and for a moment, the sound is so haunting it almost convinces her she's the woman they believe her to be. But at the back of the church, a man watches, quiet and patient, his gaze cutting through her performance like a blade through silk. Rain begins as a whisper, then builds into a steady rhythm against umbrellas blooming across the cemetery. She stands beneath a black canopy, posture rigid, voice low as she murmurs polite thanks to each well-wisher. The earth below yawns open, swallowing the gleam of polished wood and the echoes of half-hearted prayers. The crowd drifts away in murmured clusters, their pity dissolving into weather. Only one man lingers at a distance, his gaze fixed not on the grave, but on her. He watches the way her expression resets between condolences, how her breathing steadies the moment she thinks no one is looking. When their eyes meet, she smiles, just a flicker, perfectly polite, perfectly hollow, before turning back to the darkening sky. That night, the house feels too still. The lamps burn low, their amber glow soft against framed photographs that seem frozen mid-laughter. She moves through each room like a visitor, her steps soundless on polished floors. The air holds his scent, faint and fading, a ghost she almost pities. At the kitchen table, she pours herself a glass of wine, the liquid trembling just slightly in her hand before settling. A folder lies open before her, its contents neat and official black ink on crisp paper, spelling out numbers and clauses. She traces her finger along the printed name at the bottom, then closes it gently, the corners of her mouth turning upward. Outside, rain taps against the windows in an even, unbroken rhythm. Inside, her heartbeat matches it. By morning, her grief has found its voice, soft, trembling, perfectly modulated. She sits at the kitchen counter, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in delicate fragments about loss and paperwork. On the other end, a calm male voice guides her through the claim process, his questions patient but precise. She answers each one with measured pauses, but a single hesitation slips through, sharp enough to catch attention. He writes something down, the sound of his pen steady but deliberate. She doesn't notice. Her tone recovers instantly, steady and composed, each syllable wrapped in just enough sorrow to be believed. When the call ends, she exhales, sets the phone down, and closes her eyes. For a moment, the silence feels safe. By evening, sympathy has a schedule. Neighbors arrive with covered dishes and comforting words, their voices hushed but practiced. She thanks them, smiles gently, accepts casseroles she'll never eat. When the last door closes, her shoulders drop. The house exhales with her. She walks down the hallway to his study, flicks the light on, and stands still. Everything remains as he left it. Neat, orderly, untouched. The faint scent of his cologne clings to the air, and for the first time, her composure falters. Her fingers hover above the drawer of his desk, then pull back. Not yet. Outside, thunder murmurs over the rooftops, low and distant. She looks at her reflection in the dark window, her face split by raindrops, and whispers to no one, "It's almost over." The morning feels clean and sterile, the kind of quiet that hides unease. She sits at her dining table surrounded by sunlight and paperwork, the phone resting beside a half-finished cup of coffee gone cold. When it rings, she inhales once, steady and deliberate, and answers in a tone that hovers between grief and gratitude. The voice on the other end is calm, professional, practiced, asking again for small details, the date, the time, the place. Her answers come easily at first, rehearsed like lines in a play she's memorized. But when the man asks for the name of the marina, there's the faintest pause. It's barely a second, but enough. He hears it. The kind of silence that tells a story all its own. Her words resume smooth again, but the call's rhythm has changed. The calm in his voice turns inquisitive, and she feels it, the invisible thread of suspicion tightening quietly between them. Paul leans back in his chair after the call ends, the pen still balanced in his hand. His office hums with the low sound of old air conditioning, the fluorescent light flickering faintly. Something doesn't fit. He replays the recording, listening to the way her tone shifts between sorrow and calculation. Each phrase too careful, too controlled. He marks the timestamps where she hesitates. One before she says, accident. Another before she mentions, boat. The words sound hollow, like they've been borrowed. He's handled hundreds of claims, heard every kind of grief, every shade of despair, but never one this precise. He opens a new file, labels it with her name, and underlines one word, review. The next day, the town moves on, as small towns do. Sympathy fades into gossip whispered over fences and checkout counters. Clara walks the aisles of the local grocery store, head high, posture poised, a faint smile painted on. To strangers, she's admirable, a woman surviving tragedy with grace. But every step feels heavier under the hum of fluorescent lights. She catches her reflection in the freezer glass and holds it a moment too long. There's a flicker there, something restless behind the calm. When the cashier offers a polite, "How are you holding up?" her answer comes smooth and hollow, own day at a time. As she leaves, she doesn't notice the same black sedan idling across the street, windows tinted, engine running. Paul drives out to the marina listed in the report. The docks stretch quiet and slick with rain, ropes creaking gently against empty boats. The water moves with that deceptive calm that hides depth. He walks to the office, introduces himself to the manager, and asks routine questions. The man behind the counter remembers her visit. Polite, quiet, careful. He mentions she'd come alone that morning, long before anyone else arrived. Paul's pen stills. The report said she was with her husband when the accident happened. He doesn't react. He only nods, thanks the man, and steps back into the rain. The waves slap the wood beneath his shoes, rhythmic and cold. He looks out toward the horizon, where the fog swallows the water, and knows that stories don't sink this easily. That evening, Clara returns home to a message flashing on the answering machine. A soft voice, polite, identifying itself from the insurance company, asking for just a few follow-up questions. She stares at the machine, unmoving. The room is dim, the last light of day bleeding orange through the blinds. Her hand hovers over the button, then drops to her side. The house creaks softly, settling into night. She pours another glass of wine, drinks it faster this time. Outside, a car passes, headlights washing briefly across the living room wall. She turns sharply toward the window, heart quickening, before realizing it's nothing. The silence after feels thicker now, pressing against her skin. Somewhere in that silence, she knows the story she built so carefully has already begun to unravel. The storm outside beats against the windows like an echo from another time. She dreams of the water again, the way the boat tilted, the sudden weightlessness before the splash, his voice swallowed by wind and distance. In sleep, her breath quickens, her hand twitches, fingers grasping for something already gone. She wakes before dawn, drenched in sweat, heart thundering. The silence feels too loud now, filled with the ghosts of her own invention. She rises, walks barefoot through the hall, and pauses at the study door. For the first time, she opens the drawer she once avoided. Inside, the contents are simple. A watch, a wallet, a folded photograph. She stares at the photo until her reflection fades into the glass, leaving only a smile. And everything she took from it. The following afternoon, Paul sits in the precinct office across from Detective Elise Marrow. Files spread between them, pages marked with notes and photographs. Her calm presence contrasts his restless focus. She listens quietly as he explains the inconsistencies, the timeline, the missing witness, the Marina records. When he finishes, she says nothing for a moment, then asks for the full transcript of the claim call. Her tone is measured, but there's something in her eyes. That familiar spark of intuition that smells the lie before it's spoken. As she flips through the pages, one detail catches her attention. The signature date. It's dated 2 days before the accident. Her hand stills. When she looks up, the unspoken understanding between them hangs heavy. They're not chasing grief anymore. They're chasing intent. Clara stands in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with methodical precision. The rhythmic sound of the knife echoes in the empty house. Her movements are too deliberate, each slice an act of control. The television murmurs faintly in the background, a news segment about a local investigation at a marina. Her hand hesitates for just a second before the blade touches the cutting board again. The reporter mentions new evidence, and the air seems to thin around her. She turns off the TV, wipes her hands, and looks out the window. The street is empty, but she feels the eyes of the world pressing against the glass. Her reflection stares back at her, steady but trembling beneath the surface. Flashback. The same marina, weeks before the accident. The sky is bruised with evening light as Daniel unties the boat's ropes, his smile warm, easy. He calls her name, laughter soft on the wind. She answers, but her voice carries no warmth. The tension between them lingers like the scent of gasoline and salt. He tries to speak. An apology, maybe, but her attention drifts to the water, dark and endless. When he steps closer, she steps back. The camera lingers on their faces, his hopeful, hers unreadable. Then she smiles, faint and practiced, and tells him to start the engine. The sound that follows, the roar of ignition, the crackle of flame beneath the surface, will later be called an accident. But in this moment, under the dying sun, something in her gaze already knows what's coming. Back in the present, Paul and Elise sit in silence as they review photographs from the recovered boat. The hull is scorched, the metal twisted, but something catches Paul's eye, a faint residue line near the engine, chemical and deliberate. Elise leans closer, recognition flashing across her face. They exchange a look, quiet and grim. Outside, the evening sun bleeds into crimson through the blinds, painting the walls in the color of endings. Paul closes the folder and says softly, "She didn't lose him." "She planned it." Elise doesn't reply. She only nods once, her eyes fixed on the photo of the couple, smiling, perfect and doomed. As the faint sound of rain begins again, steady and unforgiving, morning light pours through blinds, thin and cold. Clara sits in the living room, phone in hand, scrolling through messages that grow fewer by the day. Sympathy has turned into silence. Outside, a police cruiser idles for a moment before drifting past, slow and deliberate. She freezes, heart thudding, before forcing herself to stand. Each step feels rehearsed, but less convincing now. In the mirror, her reflection studies her, hair immaculate, expression calm, but something in the eyes betrays fatigue. The house feels smaller with every breath, its walls too aware. When the phone rings again, she doesn't answer. The machine picks up, capturing a woman's voice identifying herself as Detective Marrow. Clara listens to the message in stillness. each syllable peeling away a layer of her control. Detective Marrow's office smells faintly of coffee and rain-soaked paper. She reviews the files, call transcripts, autopsy reports, photopsy reports, photops of the doc. Paul sits across from her, pen tapping slowly against his notebook. They speak in low tones, their words precise and deliberate. Elise highlights a line from the coroner's report, traces of an accelerant found beneath the decking near the boat. It matches the residue from the engine Paul discovered. Their eyes meet across the desk, and the room seems to hold its breath. She closes the folder, the motion quiet but final. "Bring her in," she says. Paul hesitates. "She's careful," he warns. Elise answers with a faint, knowing smile. "So am I." The knock at Clara's door comes just after sunset. The world outside glows with the soft orange of dying daylight, the air thick with humidity and silence. She opens it to find Detective Marrow framed in the doorway, polite yet unyielding, badge in hand. The conversation that follows is calm, almost cordial, but every question carries weight. "We'd like to clarify a few things about the accident," the detective says, voice even. Clara invites her in, gestures toward the sofa, her hands steady despite the tremor beneath her skin. The questions start small, routine, harmless, but the phrasing shifts, circling closer to what lies beneath. When Marrow mentions the fuel traces, Clara's throat tightens. Her smile falters for just an instant. It's enough. The detective notices everything. After the detective leaves, Clara paces the kitchen in near darkness, every shadow feeling too alive. She pours another drink, the glass shaking as it meets the counter. Her breath comes shallow, sharp. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall begins to irritate her, constant, accusing. She imagines their faces, the quiet certainty in their questions, and she knows what they're thinking. The lie she built so carefully now feels fragile, transparent, ready to shatter with one misplaced word. She closes the curtains, locks the doors, and sits in silence until the ticking becomes unbearable. Then, in one sudden motion, she hurls the glass against the wall. It explodes into fragments that scatter like truth, finally breaking free. Meanwhile, across town, Paul and Elise watch the storm build outside the precinct windows. Reports and phone logs fill their table, each line another knot in Clara's web. Elise points to a record. A call made to the marina the night before the accident, traced to Clara's home phone. It's the final thread. They exchange a long look. Not triumph, but quiet gravity. "Tomorrow," Elise says softly. "We bring her in." Paul nods, though his eyes linger on the rain-streaked glass. The sound of thunder rolls low across the city, distant but certain. It's no longer a question of guilt, only how long she can pretend not to hear the knock that's coming. The morning dawns gray and heavy, the air thick with the promise of something breaking. Clara sits at her dressing table, staring into the mirror as if waiting for her reflection to accuse her. The mascara brush trembles in her hand, leaving a faint smear below her eye. She wipes it away quickly, too quickly, leaving a dark trace of panic. The phone rings again. She knows the number now without looking. This time she answers. The voice is calm, official, and polite, asking her to come to the station to finalize some paperwork. She agrees before realizing she's spoken. When the call ends, she sits still, frozen between vanity and dread. Outside, the sky swells with rain clouds pressing low against the quiet house that has begun to feel like a cell. The interrogation room is smaller than she expected. Bare walls, a single table, 2 chairs, one camera blinking silently in the corner. Detective Marrow enters with quiet composure, files in hand. Paul follows, setting a recorder on the table. Clara sits straight, hands clasped neatly in her lap, eyes clear but cautious. The questions begin soft. Details of the trip, weather, safety protocols. Her answers are smooth at first, Practiced. The words she's said a dozen times before. But the rhythm shifts when Elise mentions the fuel traces, then the call to the marina. The silence that follows is surgical. Clara exhales through her nose, forces a smile, and says she doesn't remember. Paul leans forward, his voice low and calm. You remember everything else. The line lands like a blade. Her hands tighten until her knuckles pale. Hours pass. The air grows thick with silence between each question. Elise doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. Her calm dismantles every defense Clara has left. Photographs slide across the table. The dock, the burned hull, Daniel's signature dated before the trip. Each image lands with the dull thud of inevitability. Clara's expression shifts in fragments. Confusion, denial, then the faintest tremor of fear. She insists she loved him, her voice breaking just enough to sound real. But when Elise asks why she called the marina alone that night, her eyes betray her. It's not guilt that flickers there, but calculation, a search for what they know, what they don't. Elise sees it. You didn't just lose him, she says softly. You arranged it. The words hang in the air like the crack before thunder. That night, Clara sits in her car outside the station, long after the interview ends. Rain pelts the windshield, each drop blurring the streetlights into streaks of gold and red. Her hands grip the steering wheel until her knuckles ache. The mask's cracked and she feels it, the weight of truth pressing against her ribs, fighting to surface. She could leave now, vanish into the dark. The thought tempts her, pulses through her veins like adrenaline. But she doesn't start the car. Instead, she watches her reflection in the rearview mirror, her own eyes unrecognizable. For the first time, she doesn't know which version of herself will speak next, the widow or the killer. Inside the precinct, Elise and Paul review the footage from the interrogation. Clara's poise, her deflections, the brief tremor in her voice, every frame tells its own truth. Elise rewinds to the moment when the photograph of the boat hits the table. Her eyes pause on the freeze frame. Clara's gaze locked on the image, her lips parting in something between fear and recognition. There, Elise says quietly. Paul nods. It's not a confession, but it's enough. Outside the window, dawn begins to break. Pale, indifferent, inevitable. Elise closes the file and leans back, the exhaustion in her eyes softening into resolve. Tomorrow, she murmurs, we make it official. And as the first light filters through the blinds, the storm Clara built prepares to turn on her. The precinct feels colder this morning. Fluorescent light hums faintly overhead as the rain outside tapers to a thin drizzle. Clara sits at the same metal table, her hands folded tightly together, her wrists trembling in the stillness. She's been here for hours, without speaking. Across from her, Detective Mara watches. Patient, silent, the kind of silence that draws truth from the void. When Clara finally looks up, her eyes no longer fight. You think I meant for it to happen, she says softly. Her voice doesn't waver, but it lacks the rhythm of performance now. Elise doesn't respond. She lets the quiet answer for her. Clara exhales and closes her eyes. Maybe I did. The flashback begins where denial ends. The marina, the night before the accident. Wind whips across the dark water, carrying the smell of salt and gasoline. Clara stands alone by the boat, the jerrycan beside her half empty. Her face is calm, almost serene. In her mind, it's not murder, it's freedom. A clean slate wrapped in smoke and silence. She unscrews the fuel cap, pours carefully, methodically, her breath steady in the darkness. The sound of footsteps startles her. Daniel appears, jacket half-zipped, calling her name. His smile falters when he sees what she's holding. For a moment, the world pauses between them. The soft slap of waves, the hiss of rain. Two lives on opposite sides of a decision that cannot be undone. Back in the interrogation room, Elise leans forward, voice low. Tell me what happened. Clara's gaze drifts to the table's reflection, the faint blur of her own face swimming in the metal. Her hands begin to shake. "He was leaving," she whispers. "He said he was done. That he couldn't do it anymore. I wasn't supposed to be the one left behind." Her words come slow, unraveling between sobs she no longer tries to hide. "It wasn't supposed to kill him," she says, though her eyes reveal that even she doesn't believe it. Elise slides a tissue across the table but says nothing. The truth has already arrived, quiet and inevitable, taking the shape of every word Clara cannot stop saying. Flashback. The accident. The sea heaves beneath a dark, restless sky. Daniel and Clara argue above the roar of the wind. The boat rocks violently, waves slapping its hull with merciless rhythm. He reaches for her hand. She pulls away. Then comes the sound. Sharp, metallic, final. As the engine ignites, a burst of flame blooms from the stern, reflected in her widening eyes. Daniel shouts her name, lunges toward her, but she's already turning, blinded by the flash, by fear, by something that feels like freedom. The last thing she hears before the water closes over them both is the sound of his voice, calling, breaking, gone. In the present, the confession sits heavy in the air. The recording light glows red, capturing every syllable, every breath. When Clara finally stops speaking, the room feels hollowed out. Elise closes her notebook slowly, her voice steady. "You can stop now." Clara looks up, eyes empty, face streaked with tears. For the first time, she looks small, fragile, human again. Outside, the rain begins once more, soft and unending. As Elise stands to leave, Paul watches through the observation glass, expression unreadable. The truth at last has weight, not loud or cinematic, but quiet, merciless, and real. The day of sentencing dawns cold and colorless. The courthouse rises out of the mist like something ancient, unmoved by the stories it consumes. Inside, Clara sits at the defense table, wrists cuffed loosely, gaze lowered. Her lawyer speaks in practiced tones about remorse, trauma, and desperation. She doesn't listen. The world beyond the glass windows feels distant. Voices muffled, light dilute. Across the aisle, Paul sits beside Detective Marrow, the faint sound of shuffling papers the only motion in the room. When the judge speaks her name, she looks up for the first time. The words of her sentence fall steady, deliberate, like raindrops striking stone. There's no protest, no tears, only the quiet collapse of a woman who built her own cage. The cell door closes with a sound that swallows the air. Clara stands in the small, sterile space, staring at the concrete wall ahead. Her reflection shimmers faintly in the metal of the sink. Unfamiliar, hollow-eyed, stripped of artifice. She sits on the narrow cot, the weight of silence pressing against her chest. There are no cameras now. No questions, no stage to perform on. Only time. She traces the faint scar on her wrist, where the cuff rubbed her skin, and wonders if remorse feels anything like this. This endless stillness, this waiting for something that won't come. Outside, life resumes with the quiet certainty of routine. Detective Marrow stands by the courthouse steps, raincoat gathered tight against the chill. Paul joins her, offering a nod instead of words. They don't celebrate. Justice rarely feels like victory. The rain has stopped, leaving the streets slick and glimmering beneath pale sunlight. "Do you ever get used to it?" Paul asks. Elise shakes her head. "You shouldn't." For a moment they simply stand there, the city moving around them, the sound of distant traffic blending with the whisper of wind through the trees. Then Elise turns away, her expression unreadable but resolute. Weeks later, in the small cemetery where the story began, the grass has grown over the disturbed earth. A caretaker clears wilted flowers from the gravesite. The name on the stone remains simple: Daniel Wren. The world has already begun to forget the noise that once surrounded it. Elise passes by on her morning walk, pausing for a moment at the gate. She watches the caretaker work, then lowers her gaze, her thoughts unreadable. Somewhere behind her, the town hums with ordinary life. Grocery stores opening, children laughing. The same peace that once hid a quiet horror. Justice, it seems, doesn't end things. It only lets the silence begin again. In her cell, night settles like a confession that never stops speaking. Clara lies awake, staring at the faint rectangle of moonlight cast through the barred window. Her mind drifts to the sound of the sea, the crash of waves, the hum of the engine, the final silence that followed. She imagines him standing there, untouched by anger or forgiveness, just watching. The world has taken everything from her now, even the story she tried to control. When dawn creeps in, she closes her eyes and exhales. The illusion is gone, the lies stripped bare. All that remains is the truth, and the echo of the water that will never stop calling her name.